President Trump invites Vladimir Putin to the White House for a round two after he walks back comments about Russian meddling in the 2016 election.
I have President Putin. He just said it's not Russia. I will say this, I don't see any reason why it would be. The sentence should have been, I don't see any reason why it wouldn't be Russia. And I think that probably clarifies things pretty good by itself.
We'll discuss the fallout from the Helsinki summit, including the rift within the president's own party, with Congressman Trey Gowdy, chairman of the House Oversight Committee. Then,
we cannot wait to see whether Russia attacks us in the 2018 election. We know that they are in the midst of making that a reality.
Democrats seek details of what happened in Trump and Putin's one-on-one and call for tough new sanctions. We'll discuss with New Jersey Senator Bob Menendez, the top Democrat on the Foreign Relations Committee. And in case you missed it,
I have here the indictment that was presented on Friday from the special counsel, Robert Mueller. May I give this to you to look at, sir?
Highlights from Chris's exclusive interview with the Russian leader, and insight and analysis from our Sunday panel. All right now on Fox News Sunday. And hello again from Fox News in Washington. The tension following President Trump's meeting with Vladimir Putin continues to rise this weekend as the president faces widespread criticism over his handling of Russia after he seemed to side with Putin's denials of election interference, at least at first. Joining me now from South Carolina, Congressman Trey Gowdy, chairman of the House Oversight Committee. Mr. Chairman, thanks for being here.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
You know, after the president's meeting with Vladimir Putin and that much-analyzed press conference in Helsinki, your colleague, Republican colleague from Texas, Congressman Will Hurd, a former CIA officer, wrote an op-ed for the New York Times, and it was entitled, "Trump is being manipulated by Putin. What should we do?" And in it, the Texas Republican writes, quote, "Over the course of my career as an undercover officer in the CIA, I saw Russian intelligence manipulate many people. I never thought I would see the day when an American president would be one of them." So do you agree with Congressman Hurd? Is the president being manipulated by Vladimir Putin?
Well, Will has a background as a CIA officer. I defer to him on manipulation. I can tell you this, Brett, the president has access to every bit of evidence, even more than those of us on House Intel, and Will and I serve on Intel. He has access to Pompeo and Chris Wray and Dan Coates and Nikki Haley. The evidence is overwhelming. It can be proven beyond any evidentiary burden that Russia is not our friend and they tried to attack us in 2016. So the president either needs to rely on the people that he has chosen to advise him, or those advisors need to reevaluate whether or not they can serve in this administration. But the disconnect cannot continue. The evidence is overwhelming, and the president needs to say that and act like it.
So he eventually said it through the week, Congressman, but what do you think was the evolution there? Why the hesitation?
I don't know. I watched the press conference. It wasn't just that line. It was the president missed, I think, a really good opportunity to distinguish the United States from any other country, but especially from Russia. And I don't know what was said in the private conversation, but I do know this. We got a classified briefing this week, Brett. There is no way you can listen to the evidence and not conclude, not that the Democrats were the victims, but the United States of America were the victim. We were the victims of what Russia did in 2016, and it ought to be a source of unity and rallying around the fact that we're never going to allow this to happen again, and we're going to punish those who tried to do it. And there was this equivocation during the press conference that I'm glad he corrected it. But when you're the leader of the free world, every syllable matters, and you really shouldn't be having to correct it when you're the leader of the free world.
Well, as you mentioned, after several days of kind of dealing with the rhetorical walk back, the White House announced on Twitter that senior staff had been tapped to set up a second summit, Vladimir Putin coming to Washington this fall, and that obviously caught many here in Washington by surprise. It also caught the president's director of national intelligence by surprise, who was doing an interview in Aspen at the time. Take a listen.
We have some breaking news. The White House has announced on Twitter that Vladimir Putin is coming to the White House in the fall.
Say that again? Okay.
Yeah.
That's going to be special.
Now, the DNI released a statement last night apologizing, saying he didn't mean to be critical or disrespectful in his reaction and response. But do you think it's strange that the Director of National Intelligence didn't know about the invite before it went out?
I do think it's strange. I also think this, Brett. I think that the United States of America sometimes has to meet with people that we don't have anything in common with. I think our president has to meet with the leader of North Korea. We have to meet with a leader from Iran. But it's very different to issue an invitation. This country is different. We do things differently. We set the moral standard for the rest of the world. The fact that we have to talk to you about Syria or other matters is very different from issuing an invitation. Those should be reserved for, I think, our allies like Great Britain and Canada and Australia and those who are with us day in and day out. I think we should be very judicious in who we invite and place that imprimatur of acceptance on. So I would hope the president would keep that in mind if we're issuing invitations to foreign leaders.
I want to turn to the investigation. Overnight, responding to Freedom of Information requests, the Department of Justice released a heavily redacted FISA court request by the FBI asking for permission to surveil or listen into Carter Page. Fairly low-level figure in the Trump campaign orbit, but one the FBI suspected, according to these documents, of colluding with Russian agents and maybe being one. I know you read this months ago, but it's the first time one of these kind of documents is out in the public domain, even heavily redacted. What is your take on this?
My take is that Carter Page is more like Inspector Gadget than he is Jason Bourne or James Bond. Trump never met him. Trump never had a conversation with him. I'm sure he's been on the FBI's radar for a long time, well before 2016. Here's what we'll never know, Brett. We'll never know whether or not the FBI had enough without the dossier, the unvetted DNC-funded dossier, because they included it. And everyone who reads this FISA application sees the amount of reliance they placed on this product funded by Hillary Clinton's campaign and the DNC. So that's point number one, is the dossier and its use. The other thing I hope my fellow citizens will take note of is the FBI missed a really good opportunity to tell the judge exactly who paid for that. If you look at the footnote, it takes a lot more effort to define it the way they did, where you have no idea who funded it, than just to come right out and say the DNC hired Perkins Coie, who hired Fusion GPS, who hired Christopher Steele. There, done. That's an easy footnote. Everybody can follow it. But for whatever reason, the FBI decided not to represent that to a court.
So Carter Page is never indicted. He hasn't been brought in. He's still walking around.
Yeah, and that, I mean, look, this is an investigation. All investigations don't lead to indictments. There have been 24 indictments in this case, but Carter Page is not one of them. I have a different standard between investigating something and someone. And keep in mind, counterintelligence investigations are never designed to become public. So you and I were not supposed to be having a conversation about Carter Page on national television. This case is different. He has not been indicted. He's presumed innocent. He'll be presumed innocent even if he is indicted. I don't have an issue with looking into people that have cozy relationships with Russia. That's fine. That's what law enforcement's supposed to do. I do have an issue when you rely on political opposition research that is unvetted and you represent that to a court and use it to spy on an American.
You have seen this document long ago, but are there documents that you know exist that you have yet to see?
Some. The McCabe memos, which came up during the Lisa Page interview.
Andrew McCabe, the number 2 at the FBI, who became acting director after Comey leaves.
Right. As soon as you become acting director, apparently you make a decision to memorialize all of your conversations with the president, even while you're applying for the job, I hasten to add. But I've not seen the McCabe memos. There were other references that Lisa Page made to documents and files that I think Congress is entitled to see. I've seen as much, if not more, than any other member of Congress, which is why I am so adamant that Russia is not our friend and they tried to attack us.
Are you equally adamant that the president has not colluded with Russia?
I have not seen one scintilla of evidence that this president colluded, conspired, confederated with Russia. And neither has anyone else, or you may rest assured Adam Schiff would have leaked it. So that's why they've moved off of collusion onto obstruction of justice, which is now their current preoccupation.
You mentioned Lisa Page. She and Peter Strzok, these two figures, FBI agent and FBI attorney, who had been texting back and forth. They were lovers. Had some very heated, aggressive anti-Trump texts. One that said, "We can't take a risk. It's an insurance policy." Another that said, "An investigation leading to impeachment. You and I both know the odds are nothing. If I thought it was likely, there'd be no question I'd go over to Bob Mueller," is what he's talking about. "I hesitate in part because my gut sense and concern is there's no big there." Lisa Page was up on Capitol Hill. Did she say they were talking about there's no there in the Russia case?
Well, that's the only thing it can be. You know, she was a much better witness than Peter Strzok. Look, she hates Republicans, including the one you're talking to. But she had a credibility about herself and how she answered our questions that Peter Strzok never bothered to have. Take a look at that text. That's from Peter Strzok, and he's concerned that there's no big there. He's not optimistic that there's not. He's not hopeful there's not. This is a career counterintelligence agent who is concerned that this investigation will not lead to impeachment. So it's already led to indictments. It's already led to our understanding that Russia's not our friend. You have a wonderful opportunity to safeguard our 2018 elections. None of that was enough for him, Brett. It had to be impeachment, and that was his concern, is that there was no big there. And that's why he was not sure he wanted to participate in this investigation. That is sad. It is pathetic that a career FBI agent would only be interested in impeachment, which is why he has no credibility, and she actually does have some.
So Trump supporters look at that. Former CIA Director John Brennan, former FBI Director James Comey, what he's said, what they've said, and they say they understand why the president feels a little inquisitive about where things are going.
Yeah, Brett, you don't even have to be a Trump supporter to be mindful of the fact that John Brennan thinks he's guilty of a crime for which he can be hanged, that John Brennan thinks that he should be in the dustbin of history, that Jim Comey thinks impeachment is too good of a remedy, and Jim Comey now thinks that everyone should vote Democrat, so Bernie Sanders will be the head of the Budget Committee and Dianne Feinstein will be head of Intel. I mean, these are the people that were supposed to be dispassionately, objectively investigating a fact pattern, and they have as much animus against Donald Trump as anything I have seen in my 8 years in politics. Add into that Peter Strzok, Lisa Page, and the other unidentified FBI agents who also wanted him to resign or be impeached or thought he was destabilizing. So if you're Donald Trump and you see all of these people in positions of responsibility that think you ought to be, that you're guilty of treason, a crime for which you can be put to death, by the way. That's what John Brennan said. So what I would encourage the president, those are all people from yesterday. You have your own people in place now, and it is possible to conclude that Russia interfered with us, and it still does not delegitimize your presidency. And that's where I would encourage the president to go. Russia's not our friend. We need to be very careful dealing with them, but that does not take away from the fact that he won the 2016 election, much to the chagrin of Brennan, Comey, and all the rest.
Congressman Gowdy, thanks for your time today.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Up next, did President Trump put the interests of Russia above the United States in his summit with Vladimir Putin? We'll talk to one of the top Democrats demanding answers. Senator Bob Menendez joins us next.
You're in.
Top Democrats called on President Trump to cancel his summit with Vladimir Putin after the indictments of 12 Russian military intelligence officers for interfering in the 2016 election. Now many are demanding answers to what really happened in Helsinki, calling for increased sanctions on Russia, for the president's national security team to testify, and for President Trump to press Putin to extradite those 12 agents. Joining me now, New Jersey Democratic Senator Bob Menendez. He's the top Democrat on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Welcome back to Fox News Sunday, Senator.
Good to be with you, Brett.
Thanks for being here. You know, a lot has been made, obviously, about this meeting and the news conference in Helsinki. But here's what the president said this week about actual U.S. policy after this.
Look at the sanctions I've put on. Look at the diplomats I threw out. Look at all of the things that I've done Nobody else did what I've done. Obama didn't do it. Obama was a patsy for Russia. He was a total patsy. Look at the statement he made where he thought the mics were turned off, okay? The stupid statement he made.
My last election, basically. Yeah, and after my election, I have more flexibility. Yeah, I understand. I transmit this information to Vladimir.
So, Senator, do you think U.S. policy toward Russia was tougher under the Obama administration or under the Trump administration?
Well, certainly President Obama created the European Deterrence Initiative after Russia invaded and annexed Crimea. He recommitted to the 2008 commitments NATO made to having Georgia be part of NATO once they were ready and developed. He actually imposed a series of sanctions supported by the Freedom Support Act that I helped write, and did a series of executive orders. So it was incredibly strong at the time. I have to say that when I listened to President Trump say he's been stronger, we had to bring him kicking and screaming to the CAATSA sanctions, the Counting America's Adversaries Through Sanctions Act, that had a 98-2 vote in the Senate, overwhelming vote in the House, that he didn't want to sign but was forced to sign because they had veto-proof majorities. And even so, there are about 7 mandatory provisions of that law as it relates to Russia that the administration has not pursued. So I would simply say that what I saw in Helsinki, at a moment that the president could have challenged President Putin about the reality that his 17 intelligence agencies all unanimously agreed that Russia interfered in the 2016 elections, that they are in the midst of doing that as we speak in these elections 108 days away. That was a moment to challenge him on that, on Ukraine, on what's happening in Syria, and instead the president did not show the strength that an American president, I believe, should have shown at that moment.
He says that he said that behind closed doors in that CBS interview with Jeff Glor. What would you have preferred him do in the news conference publicly?
Well, I would have liked him to have said, look, President Putin, we know that you interfered in our 2016 elections and that you're doing it now. And that's not a question, that's a statement, and here are consequences to it. If you want to rejoin the world order and observe international law and stop invading sovereign nations like Ukraine, then we can have a pathway forward. But at the end of the day, there will be real consequences, and I'm glad that we're talking, but there are real consequences to your constant engagement in our elections that undermine our democracy. I would have liked, Brett, for him to do what Chris Wallace, your colleague, did in his interview with President Putin.
Which we'll see in just a moment. I guess his supporters say he may have done that behind the scenes. He may have not said the right things in the news conference.
No one knows what he said behind the scenes because he took an extraordinary over 2 hours with only an interpreter, not even the Secretary of State.
Do you think there's any upside?
The head of national intelligence.
Is there any upside to talking to Putin?
Look, it depends if you challenge him. Now we're going to give him, a red carpet treatment and invite him to Washington. To me, that's beyond comprehension. You can speak to adversaries, but at the end of the day, you have to do it in a way in which you challenge them. The president seems to want to be chummy with Putin instead of challenging him. He should be challenging him about violating international law. He should be challenging him about the massacre that's taking place in Syria. He should be challenging him about the annexation of Crimea and say, we will never recognize the annexation of Crimea. But
Senator, you know that you don't know that he didn't do that behind closed doors.
None of us know, Brett.
Right. Okay,
I have no idea. But when you had an opportunity to show the world, all of our allies, show NATO, show the free world that you, in fact, were not supplicant to Vladimir Putin, but a challenge to him, you failed to do so. And then to come back, it's too late, too little, and the wrong continent, and now change your tune once you're here versus when you were there standing alongside Putin.
Let's turn to domestic politics. The Supreme Court nominee that the president put up, Brett Kavanaugh, you have said that you will not vote for him. Democrats are obviously pushing back. Do you believe Democrats can stop the Kavanaugh confirmation?
Well, I think if the American people understand Judge Kavanaugh's record, they will rise up, and that will stop his nomination. Look, here is a judge who has written that, in fact, the president is above the law, that he can decide what laws are constitutional or not, which I always believed was reserved for the Supreme Court under our system of government, and therefore not obey a law if, in fact, he believes it's unconstitutional. He believes the president cannot be investigated while in office. This is someone who spent 4 years with Ken Starr investigating the Clinton administration. It's amazing to me that he has the view that a president cannot be investigated.
Where are the votes going to come from to push back?
And so he has a series of challenges. I think that when people in the country know, they will raise their concerns with their members of the Senate, including Republicans. Look,
do Democrats have regrets?
Our colleagues, Dean Heller in Nevada, of course, Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski, who care about women's health, and others, I think, will have an opportunity to express themselves as to whether they want to support someone who, in fact, would erode those basic rights.
Do Democrats have regrets that Senator Harry Reid moved that vote to only requiring 51 for confirmation?
I think Republicans will regret to moving to 51 on Supreme Court nominees. There will come a moment in which they'll regret that. And, if this continues, we're going to have a Senate not as the founders of the Constitution and the framers of the Constitution imagined. It'll be just a majority vote institution like the House of Representatives, and then it will dramatically change the country.
Senator, you're up for re-election in New Jersey this year. You could face a real race in blue New Jersey. But the energy and passion and really the grassroots of your party is on the progressive side. Just over the past few days, Senator Bernie Sanders has been campaigning with the newest superstar of your party, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez from New York. They were campaigning in Kansas. Ms. Ocasio-Cortez has said capitalism will eventually come to an end. She says she doesn't mind being called a socialist. In her words, there's an Israeli occupation of Palestine. And they say, Sanders and Ocasio-Cortez, that their agenda is now the Democratic mainstream agenda. Is it?
Look, that's their agenda, and under our democracy, everybody has their agenda. I've seen extreme right-wing agendas that I disagree with equally as well. Look, our agenda as Democrats is about ultimately making sure that we have an economy that works for everyone, not just the wealthiest, not just big corporations. Our agenda is making sure that we secure our nation, including our sacred right to vote, that it cannot be affected by countries like Russia outside of the world. Our agenda is making sure that every family goes to sleep at night knowing that they have the health care they need to keep their family healthy and secure. That's our agenda.
So you don't think there'll be this progressive litmus test in your party?
Listen, I think that people care about whether or not they have an economy that helps them meet their hopes and dreams and aspirations, whether they have health care for their family, whether they can get their kid educated without being under a mountain of debt to get a college education. Those are the things that Democrats have been fighting for, will continue to do so, and I think that has universal appeal.
Well, Senator Menendez, thanks again for joining us on Fox News Sunday.
Thank you, Brett.
Up next, Chris Wallace presses Russian President Putin on many topics after the Helsinki summit. We'll have the highlights of that incredible interview next.
I stay active by staying in rhythm.
Helsinki, Chris Wallace sat down with the Russian leader for an extensive interview. Here are some of the key exchanges.
Mr. President, one of the issues that is standing in the way of more progress, as you know, are the allegations of Russian interference in the U.S. election. You have repeatedly said, and you said again today, that this was not the action of the Russian state, that if it was anything, it was patriotic Russian individuals. I have here the indictment that was presented on Friday from the special counsel, Robert Mueller, that says that 12 members of Russian military intelligence, the GRU, and they talk specifically about units 26-165 and 74-455. They say, you smile, let me finish. They say that these units were specifically involved in hacking into Democratic Party computers, stealing information, and spreading it to the world to try to disrupt the American election. May I give this to you to look at, sir? Here?
Да, положите, пожалуйста. Да. Значит, позвольте мне,
Well, let me
отвечая на ваш вопрос, начать
start answering your question
с другого.
with something a little bit different.
Смотрите, все говорят о
Let's have a look at it this way.
вмешательстве России.
People are talking about the purported interference of Russia with the election process in the United States. I've mentioned this in 2016 and I want to say it now again. And I really wish for your American listeners to listen to what I say.
Россия, как государство,
First of all, Russia, as a state, has never interfered with the internal affairs of the United States, let alone its elections.
But sir,
Second point.
this is the indictment. It shows I have 12 names here. It talks about specific units of the GRU, Russian military intelligence. Is the GRU not part of the Russian state?
Я сейчас вам отвечу.
I'll get to it. Just have a little bit of patience and you'll get a full answer to your question.
Вмешательство во внутренние дела.
Interference with the domestic affairs of the United States. Do you really believe
Что с территории Российской Федерации
that
можно было повлиять на выборы в
someone acting from the Russian territory could have influenced the United States and influenced the choice of millions of Americans?
I'm not
This is
asking whether
utterly
they
ridiculous.
influenced. I'm asking whether they tried.
Я сейчас отвечу.
I'm about to answer.
Сейчас отвечу. Вот это, во-первых, все-таки.
Well, this was the first point that I'm trying to make. If you'll have some patience, you'll hear the entire response.
Вот я говорил в 2016 году, хочу повторить сейчас.
I said this in 2016 and I say it now.
Одного из кандидатов.
The idea was about hacking an email account of a Democratic candidate.
Была какая-то подтасовка фактов.
Was it some rigging of facts? Was it some forgery of facts? That's the important thing that I'm trying to, the important point that I'm trying to make. Was this any false information planted? No, it wasn't. These hackers that are being discussed, and I'll get back to it. Just bear with me for a moment. As we're getting told, they hacked a certain email account and there was an information about manipulations conducted within the Democratic Party to incline the process in favor of one candidate. And as far as I know, the entire party leadership resigned. They admitted the fact of their manipulations. So that's one thing, that manipulations with the public opinion should stop and an apology should be made to the public at large, instead of looking for the responsible, for the party at fault. And now to the mentioned things. As I said in the press conference.
Вот сейчас господин Миллер.
But Mr. President, may I just say, you're indicating
Don't you like
that
my
they
answer?
stole real money, not counterfeit money. So are you saying it's okay because the facts that they took from the DNC, from John Podesta, it was their real emails, so it's okay to hack and spread this information out and interfere with the election?
Послушайте меня.
Well, listen to me, please.
Нет ничего.
The information that I am aware of, there's nothing false about it. Every single grain of it is true, and the Democratic leadership admitted it, the first point. Now, the second point. If you don't like my answer, you can give it to me straight away, and I just keep silence. And if you want Americans to listen to my opinion, could you please wait for a little bit? And now for the specific accusations. First of all, Special Counsel Mueller has accused a certain private company in Russia that is not even a very big enterprise. Its core area of competence is a restaurant business. And now, this company hired American lawyers and defending its integrity and reputation in an American court.
Американский суд пока ничего не обнаружил.
So far, American court has not discovered any trace of interference whatsoever. Do you know it or not? But let the millions of Americans know about it. And now to the individuals from the Indictment Act. We, with the United States, we have a treaty for assistance in criminal cases, an existing treaty that exists from 1999. It's still in force, and it works efficiently. Today I referred an example of its efficient work.
No, and I'm not trying to
Why
interrupt.
wouldn't Mr. Miller?
I'm not trying to interrupt or be
Mr. Miller?
disrespectful.
Well, let me finish. Just let me finish. Well, you're trying to interrupt, but I will finish. Why wouldn't Special Counsel Mueller send us an official request within the framework of this agreement? Our investigators will be acting in accordance with this treaty. They will question each individual that American partners are suspecting of something. Why not a single request was filed? Nobody sent us a single formal letter, formal request.
Let me just say, I don't want to
And all of it is used for the internal political struggle.
Move on to other subjects. Why do you think Robert Mueller issued this indictment 3 days before you and President Trump met here at the summit?
I'm not interested in this issue in this single bit. It's the internal political games of the United States. Don't make the relationship between Russia and the United States, don't hold it hostage of this internal political struggle. And it's quite clear to me that this is used in the internal political struggle. And it's nothing to be proud of for American democracy to use such dirty methods in the political rivalry.
Last year, Defense Secretary Mattis said that Russia is the greatest threat. Russia is the greatest threat to the United States. And he has since made it clear an even greater threat than terrorism. In March, you introduced a new generation of Russian missiles, including what you called an invincible missile, you said, that could evade, defeat all of our missile defenses, and you even released a video that showed this super missile flying over the United States and hitting Florida, very near where President Trump's estate is at Mar-a-Lago. Aren't you escalating the arms race, and aren't you being deliberately provocative?
As far as the footage is concerned, well, they do not specify that the missile is about to hit the United States. You have to look at it more carefully. Secondly, all of our new offensive... There was not signed Florida. There was not a caption saying Florida. Take a more careful look at it. There was never a caption Florida.
No, but you can see it on the map.
It was clear that it was flying over the eastern coast of the... No, it couldn't be seen on the map. Just take a closer look. And don't try to scare your population with make-believe threats. And now, I'm pretty sure I can give you as a present this footage. And now to the offensive weapons. They were not born out of nowhere. They were born as a response to the unilateral withdrawal of the United States from the ABM Treaty. From the very beginning, we've been warning our American counterparts that we are not going to join this global anti-missile system. We see no purpose for it, but we'll do everything to make means to overcome it. Well, the response of our counterparts was that the United States designed this anti-missile defense system because it's not designed to be guided against you. In 2003 or 2004, I think I mentioned one of those systems, and there was no response from our American counterparts. So what we did now, we just demonstrated that we do have means to overcome the system. It's just a negotiating item. I do hope that in terms of strategic stability, we'll be able to find a mutually acceptable solution for both sides. And that applies to the INF Treaty and to the intermediate and shorter range missiles as well.
I need to ask you domestically, not internationally, domestically inside Russia, why is it that so many of the people that oppose Vladimir Putin end up dead or close to it? Former Russian spy and double agent Sergei Skripal, the victim of a nerve agent attack in England, Boris Nemtsov, a political opponent, gunned down near the Kremlin, investigative reporter Anna Politkovskaya, murdered in an apartment building. Why is it that so many people who were political enemies of Vladimir Putin are attacked?
Well, first of all of us have plenty of political rivals. I'm pretty sure President Trump has plenty of political rivals.
But they don't end up dead.
Not always. Well, haven't presidents been killed in the United States? Have you forgotten about it? Well, has Kennedy been killed in Russia or in the United States? Or Mr. King? What happens at the clashes between police and civil society and several ethnic groups? Well, that's something that happens on the U.S. soil. All of us have our own set of domestic problems. But going back to what happened in Russia, yes, we do have crime, and unfortunately, there are some crimes. And at some extent, Russia's statehood is maturing, and there are some side effects, and we persecute people responsible for these crimes. But since you've mentioned the Skripal case, we would like to get at least some sort of a document and evidence about it, but nobody gives it to us. It's the same thing as the accusations with meddling into election process in America.
You can watch Chris's full interview with Vladimir Putin on FoxNewsSunday.com. We do know where Chris is, and he will be back next week. Up next, we'll bring in our Sunday group to discuss the fallout from Helsinki and the Russia investigation going forward.
Say this, I don't see any reason why it would be. The sentence should have been, I don't see any reason why it wouldn't be Russia.
Is Russia still make your way out? Is Russia still targeting the U.S., Mr. President? Press, let's go. Make your way out. No, you don't believe that to be the case?
The president said thank you very much and was saying no to answering questions.
I let him know we can't have this. We're not going to have it. And that's the way it's going to be. Getting along with Russia is a positive, not a negative. Right. Now, with that being said, if that doesn't work out, I'll be the worst enemy he's ever had. The worst he's ever had.
The evolution this week of President Trump's position regarding Russia's interference in the 2016 presidential election. It's time now for our Sunday group. Fox News senior political analyst Brit Hume, columnist for The Hill, Juan Williams, and the co-host of Benson and Harf on Fox News Radio, Marie Harf and Guy Benson. All right, Britt, the president's been very active on Twitter this morning, just a few moments ago, saying, I had a great meeting with Putin, and the fake news used every bit of their energy to try and disparage it. So bad for our country. Thoughts?
Well, what do we know about that meeting? Well, we know very little because there's no record of it of any kind that we know of except in the memories of the two participants and their translators. Unless Russia, of course, taped it. So we don't have any real way to assess that other than what Trump claimed about it. And, of course, his performance, as you just showed at the press conference with Putin in Helsinki, was, I think Newt Gingrich stated correctly, the worst moment of his presidency, and one that I think, despite his walking it back and repeatedly saying other things in its aftermath, I don't think he's going to live that down anytime soon.
Juan, a lot of Trump supporters point to that there's no substantive policy changes. They say it was a bad press conference. But as far as being aggressive against Russia, this administration still is.
I hope they are. I mean, obviously, the president kind of slow-walked the sanctions. We couldn't figure out why it took so long to implement the sanctions. But yes, there are sanctions in place. But let's not bury the lead on this story, Brett, which is, I think, as Newt Gingrich said, as others have said, Trey Gowdy said in your interview with him this morning, this is a national disgrace. This is unbelievable. And the one thing we do know that came out of this meeting was a discussion between President Trump and Vladimir Putin about possibly talking or interviewing Michael McFaul, our former ambassador to Russia, that the Russians think was overly aggressive on the human rights front. So to me, that's extremely troubling. I think that all of us have to say, hey, we understand that President Trump doesn't want to delegitimize his election. But again, to reiterate something Trey Gowdy said this morning, this is about America being under attack and being under attack heading into the midterms in terms of our election and democratic process.
Guy.
Well, I think it's difficult for the president to go on Twitter. It's easy for him, but for us to digest him blaming all of this on the fake news, because the fake news simply played in its entirety the press conference that he himself participated in, and it was a very, very low moment. I do think that his pivot eventually to what we saw in the CNBC interview was the thing that the administration ought to be doing, which is highlighting not just the sanctions, but the diplomatic expulsions, the lethal aid to Ukraine, and other elements that are much more robust of the policy as opposed to the rhetoric that we saw when the president was standing with Vladimir Putin, which was, again, I think, indefensible.
Right, but as the week went on, in Middle America, how do you think this plays?
Well, I think Middle America has tuned out a lot of the conversation about foreign policy because they're worried about the economy, they're worried about education and healthcare costs. So that's a separate conversation. But it is still very important to digest what President Trump is doing on foreign policy. Put that Helsinki press conference in the context of how he treated our NATO allies. Right? He went to Europe. He treated our NATO allies very hostilely. He really attacked them publicly and then did the opposite and was very weak standing next to President Putin in terms of his language. So I don't think this was a rhetorical screw up. I think that President Trump wants American foreign policy to go in a different direction vis-a-vis our allies and Russia. And I think that has influenced the fact that he is not trying to protect the United States now from this happening again. And for all Americans, that should be a concern because we know Russia's trying to do it right now. And his blinders to Russian interference makes countering it harder.
Okay, Britt, just last thing on this. Here's what the administration says and his supporters. NATO has increased its military spending largely because of Trump's pressure. The U.S. has put in heavy military equipment into Ukraine.
Yeah,
not something that Russia would like.
More now. Right.
We have helped liquid natural gas in Eastern Europe.
Right.
That is destabilizing Russia.
Right.
There are things that are doing much beyond